All right, we're back again. This is Vincent Tseng on Instagram at the.wandering.warrior. And joining me today are MANOJ and Joseph. Joseph, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
I study praying mantis style under Shifu Profatilov, and my martial arts background is boxing and Muay Thai.
Awesome. And MANOJ.
Yeah, I've studied, well, first MANOJ, and it's at the KungFu Intellect on Instagram and YouTube. And I studied 7-star mantis back when I was in college and been practicing Xingyi Dao, which is a mixture of Xingyi and Bagua. Since 2005, and I've also trained at MMA gym.
All right, and I think this brings it back. I mean, I practiced mantis boxing under Sufu Randy Brown, a blend of 8-step and 7-star, and of course, I'm here in Taiwan practicing Shuai Jiao and have had some BJJ, Judo, MMA kind of experiences as well. So we've all got mantis in common, but we all also have a lot of different perspectives on this traditional Chinese martial arts. Can you walk us through a bit of what your experiences have been with all the various Chinese martial arts you've practiced, MANOJ?
Okay, yeah, I would say my first experience with at least formal training of Chinese martial arts was when I was doing a 7-star mantis while I was in college. And prior to that, I had done Tong Sudo for maybe a year. And that was, from that, I gotten decent kicking and stance work and knew how to, punch and stuff. But Mantis introduced a lot of this concept of sticking and kind of clinging to your opponent, and more of a flowing movement one into the other, and a lot of other fighting concepts that I hadn't been introduced to in Tong Sudo yet. On from there, I did that while I was in college, so that was roughly 3 years. I moved out to Seattle, and I'd heard about internal martial arts just from kung fu movies and stuff like that. So I was somewhat interested, since I had this gap. My teacher was, I'm on the other side of the coast now. I was like, oh, maybe I'll try internal martial arts. And I came across the teacher that introduced me to Xingyi Dao. And that really, I would say, stresses more of particular body mechanics. And it's kind of an interesting, unique way of issuing power that I hadn't seen before.
I got a quick follow-up question on that. What was your original motivation for picking up martial arts? Was it self-defense, or more like health, or magic powers? Or what was it? For me, it was magic powers for sure.
Right. Yeah. I guess somewhat. For me, it's always been just it. Even to this day, I say, people ask what I do, I say, oh, it's cool. I mean, I don't have a reason other than that's it's very interesting. I guess I grew up in the 80s, so I was watching Ninja Turtles and playing Street Fighter in the arcade and listening to Wu-Tang. So it was always around me.
So what would you say, because you practice a bunch of different arts, what would you say the benefits of each art that you practice, and how do you combine practicing different styles?
Right. So combining the 7-star mantis is probably something I'm more recently doing. I kind of have a long gap from college till maybe the last 3-4 years, where I throw a bungbo every once in a while and be like, oh, I still kind of remember. But now I'm really kind of thinking about it, because I still value that. I was kind of upset at myself for forgetting a bunch of it. But for Mantis, I think the fighting principles, that kind of 14 or 12 keyword formula that I kind of learned back then is very good. And the leg trapping and that the idea and drills that we train to stick and feel the opponent out of Mantis were very good. And I've actually carried, especially that part, I carried over into Xingyi Dao practice. So when I'm practicing more application, I would try to work into that feeling the opponent, working the leg trapping in there, and it's kind of already there. When I look at the movements of Xingyi, it's kind of there already, but it's kind of practicing a, let's say, abstracted manner. I guess it depends how you train, but it seems more abstract to me. Xingyi Dao, I find the best benefit, which I kind of alluded to earlier, is the focus on the body mechanics and somewhat unique body mechanics for generating power. And Bagua, I found beneficial in that it teaches you to be able to rotate and spiral in all these different directions, which initially I wasn't real sure of the benefit until I started training the MMA gym, doing the wrestling, and I was like, oh, this kind of feels like my body's already used to these kind of rotational movements, swimming the arms in and out. I feel like I already did this. I realized I was from the Bagua training.
I see. Would you say that 7-star Mantis gave you like a tactical mode of operation or tactical toolbox, but that the Xingyi, the Bagua gave you like a deeper understanding of what your body could do and how to train your body to do it?
Yeah, I would say that's exactly it. Yeah, I would say that's probably the best way to describe those two. And that's, when I started doing training at the MA gym, I kind of ran into this question for myself: is why do I still practice? Like Xingyi out, like why should I separate time for that too? But I felt a subjective benefit in my body from still practicing it, both recovery and just general feels good, subjective reasoning. So, but I think that summarizes it pretty well, though, is that the internal arts give you a better understanding of how to use your body and the body mechanics, how to generate power, receive it, and all that. And 7-star Mantis definitely had, at least from my experience, the better fighting or more systematic fighting principles.
Okay. Interesting. And how did you? I'm really curious. How did you find your movements or your thinking change or not change, or how did you feel when you were put in an MMA training environment? Was it just like smooth, hit the ground running, or were there a few shaky points here or there and a few areas where you felt like you excelled without having formally trained, in these whatever disciplines are at this gym?
Right. So what carries over pretty much readily, for at least for me, was the striking, of course, right? I cannot punch and I kick, and all that was pretty straightforward. The hardest part, probably as you would expect, is the ground grappling. Anything where I was like not on 2 feet, it's just no man's land for me. Right? It's just not something I trained before. Everything is standing. So the wrestling, I had to build up the cardio for that, getting up and down off the ground all the time, and carrying someone's weight on you. That was kind of a surprise to me. It felt better than I thought it would. But once again, once the wrestling goes to like when you're on all fours and stuff like that, more the pinning, it's kind of out of territory.
For me personally, I found that switching between the stand-up game and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or MMA, wrestling, and submission grappling. That is the transition that was in between. Because for me, you know, I've got a blue belt in BJJ. Not
Okay.
nothing crazy, but you know, I have experience with this kind of stuff. But still, that transition period in between, you know, flowing directly from your throw or takedown into that arena, so to speak. For me, that was probably the most awkward phase that I had to get over. Because it's just, you know, you have the training modality of like, okay, I'm going to stay standing at all costs. And then you have the other training
Right.
modality, which is, oh, it doesn't matter, just get secure position and start working a position or opening arms and start striking, whatever. Tactical switch up, so to speak, you know. So like it was almost like I had a mental block for a month. So yeah, that's interesting.
For me, I'm sorry. For me, I was
well,
about to say the way he trains from an MMA perspective, and because I hadn't really done grappling before, you know, he trains wrestling right into whatever ground position, right? So we always end our takedowns in either the person's guard or inside control, scar hold, something of that nature. Because I hadn't done really grappling. I mean, when I did 7-star, there's like loose grappling, hand trapping, you know, trips, throws, stuff like that. But it's not like, I wouldn't say it's the same as wrestling.
Okay.
At least how I have it in mind, how it is at the MMA gym. So I didn't have, that was like a blank slate for me.
I got a question. So you said that you know, like your motivation for doing Chinese martial arts was because was just fun. It's a fun thing to do. It's really cool. Does that carry over to your MMA training? Do you feel that it's like really cool, or is it your motivation is a bit different for this?
Yeah, yeah, I still enjoy it. That's just it's all martial arts.
Mhm.
In fact, I have a friend training partner, or kung fu brother has been doing Xing Dao with me. We work out on Tuesday evenings. I've been trying to integrate some of the things I've learned from wrestling into the Xing Dao practice to make it some of the drills more lively, more applicable, to actually use the like 5 elements and things we learned in a more practical, lively setting. So I'm trying to merge the training, just because I mean, you can't practice them each separately. Just you can't do it. None of time. I consider myself a hobbyist, but yeah, I train minimum 8 hours a week or so. But that might be more or less than a hobbyist. I don't know what that is, but yeah, so I can't do it all at once. All of them, treat them separately.
So you have a very interesting page, you know, and on Instagram that is the KungFu Intellectual, and it focuses a lot on like biomechanics and things like that. Um, how did you, you know, come to this, you know, to view martial arts like that?
Yeah. Why did this obsession begin?
Yeah, you know, it's a question I've had for a long time, but you know, the pandemic, you're stuck, you can't go nowhere, restaurants are closed, your normal routine's broken. And I was like, you know, I've always had this question: what is the Chinese martial arts has some unique, especially internal martial arts, has some unique training methods, right? I mean, you look at them, you're like, what is this doing, really? You know,
Mhm.
when you think about it from if you want to explain it to someone like at my MMA gym who's doing kickboxing, wrestling, and you like do this weird exercise, they're gonna be like, "What is this for?" And I'm like, "That's a good question." So I was like, you know, I looked on the internet myself, see anyone had really looked at it this way, and I hadn't seen anyone approach any of the exercises from like from an exercise kind of science standpoint.
Mhm.
Like you see books with yoga, like Anatomy of Yoga, but for Qigong and some of these unique training exercises that Chinese martial arts has, I've never seen anyone take that approach. So if you have a question and you want to answer, I decided to study it myself and take my best stab at it and share it while I'm doing it. Because a lot of times I'll study something, put it away, forget about it, but it's kind of a working notebook, but also benefit to other people who are interested.
It seems like you have found some answers there for yourself, at least as far as the, what is the underlying principle of the body mechanics there. And I would absolutely love to hear about that if you want to share.
Yeah, I was going to do some videos a little bit about the overall power generation biomechanics. This is still kind of just a disclaimer here. I'm studying this all myself, just reading books and things. I'm not a medical student or anything. I'm career as an engineer, but it's just a side interest. What I view how Chinese martial arts generates power is you create tension along a longer chain of muscles, and this follows the fascial connections through the body. So if you think about you see this in almost every power generation movement, just in humans. If you think about throwing a ball or throwing a javelin, whatever, there's this stretch. You stretch your waist, you stretch your chest, arm externally rotates, and you've basically created tension, basically more like a rubber band being pulled. And then at the end of that full stretch, you contract and everything snaps forward. So that's Chinese martial arts is still using that same concept, but a lot of times it uses different lines. So throwing a ball is like the line from your foot up through the front of your body, all the way into your arm. If you see, I don't know how familiar you are with Dai Xingyi. You might have seen some of my videos of me doing that fundamental exercise, squatting monkey. It involves this rounding of the back.
Mm.
That is creating the line of basically tension along the back of the body. And then when you release it, it goes back to neutral. It's kind of like a bow. When you pull it, you get that tension, then you release it, and it goes back to neutral. And you'll see other movements. I'm trying to think what art does this. You'll see some movements where people will kind of lean back, kind of this round, and it's stretching the front and snag back. But it's all that stretch shortening cycle. And I believe that the breathing increases the amount of tension generated because of all the musculofascial connections from the diaphragm around the body. If you look at the video I have on the thoracolumbar fascia, the rectus sheath, and the abdominal, you'll see that the muscles in the front of the body, the obliques, rectus abdominis, transverse abdominis, they all kind of connect via connective tissue. And then they also connect around the back to what's called the thoracolumbar fascia, when that connects into the lats, the glutes, and everything else. So you have this, in the anatomy books, they'll talk about a hoop, but I think they're neglecting the diaphragm, which sits on top of that hoop and the pelvic floor, which creates that bowl. And that, I was like, oh, that looks like Dantian.
That's very, very interesting.
Oh,
I mean, it corresponds with a lot of things that we know from praying mantis. Like one of the underlying principles is actually Tong Bei, which is through the back,
Right.
which means actually stretching out your body as much as possible and throwing everything in there. So extending and contracting and big movements.
Right.
Sounds really good.
So I would say the
Yeah, and it goes well with the Nagong that we have at least.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Cool, cool.
Yeah, I would say the internal arts, I think, help you train to go from being able to create that tension in a large movement to doing it in a smaller movement via your
Right.
own neuromuscular control,
Mm-hmm,
basically.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Do you think that's a process that goes on mainly in your mind, going from large to smaller movements, but having the
Uh,
same kind of output?
right. So say mind. It's neuromuscular. So I believe
Mm-hmm.
you have to train it somewhat to get the train the reaction of your
Sure.
neurology to activating the muscles as you want. Um, so I think it's a real physical thing that takes training to do. You can't just go practicing a big move and be like, I'm gonna make it small tomorrow. I don't think it'll work like that.
Right. Right. That's not what I meant. Yeah. I understand what you're saying. The
Okay.
mind, I mean, neurological. Yeah. That's
Right,
what I mean.
right, right.
Yeah. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't think there's any other mind outside of that.
I just want to clarify because I think a big detriment to Chinese martial arts is it's a lot of the kind of hokey things have been conflated into there and gotten away from you know plain old physiology, reality, and stuff like that. So a lot of people talk about energy and mental things. I was going to be like, oh,
Yeah.
this is
We're not
real.
good. We're not going to talk about that.
I think
Right,
also,
okay.
there's how do I say that? Especially in a pre-scientific setting, and where like you don't really, I mean, I'm sure they've taken their sword and cut open a body, but like not surgery, not cadavers, they haven't studied fascia and muscles and all that in terms of piece by piece, right? In what we think of as modern medical practice. They haven't dissected people. So I wonder sometimes, are some of these more esoteric or philosophical or even shamanistic sounding ways of describing your body movement really come from how you feel it within yourself as you do it, and your own cultural background as far as how you understand the world and energy, right? But then when you haven't been through that, the full course of that training, when you haven't been through violence, when you haven't hit somebody and been like, that didn't feel good, and then hit somebody and wow, I felt like I punched thin air, but the guy's on the ground, he's passed out now. What's the difference here, right? When you knock someone out clean versus not, like when you haven't gone through the work, it's very easy to misunderstand or actually just fully just not understand what this guy is talking about, right? you know on top of all the other things that are happening, arts are gentrifying, people were doing this as a hobby, not for survival and all that kind of stuff, right? So sometimes I wonder if like the hokey stuff, there's a bit of it that is, I don't know, Chinese woo woo, but then there's another aspect of this which it might just be like the people trying to interpret it maybe did not actually do all the work to get what the guy is saying when he says, oh yeah, the energy has to come up into the dantian and then get issued out a certain way. They're like, okay. All right, sounds like mystical energy. you know
That's a good point you make. Before the pandemic started, I visited Master Lee, my teacher's teacher, over in New York, and he showed us some Dantian exercises that involved this breathing. I remember his explanation. His English is kind of broken, but his explanation of them, I was like, that doesn't make any sense at all. And then during the pandemic, I was like, well, every day I was like, I'm gonna practice it, see if I can figure it out. And eventually, like a light bulb hit. And that kind of started my cascade into studying the physiology and all that. Um, uh, but yeah, I agree with that assessment. I often refer to Chinese medicine or the qigong type aspects as being an old model of the human body, just like the Greeks had the four humors or whatever. It's
Mm,
like an old model of the body because, you know, like you said, they didn't have ultrasound MRIs. You can, even if you dissect a person, you don't actually know how the muscle's working, right? Till you, right? Because there's the neurology that activates it, chemical,
right.
calcium polarization, all that stuff.
And I feel
Yeah.
like fascia must be something that's difficult to study. Like it's like a sheath around your musculature, and like if it's not live, how can you really study its properties? That's a tough one, I think,
Right. That
especially in a pre-scientific kind of setting.
right. That whole subject is quite fascinating. I mean, it's the human body is just it's insane. There's just layers and layers and layers. I mean, there's multiple layers of fascia that surrounds your muscles, connects the muscle, connects your organs. It's in the organs. Like it's basically in
Um,
the muscle itself. It's just like whoa. It's like
I would say I would actually disagree there slightly. I think Chinese had a pretty good idea of the anatomy of the actual anatomy of the body. Um, uh, we know examples of like prehistoric drawings
mhm.
that actually, you know, you've seen the cave drawings of animals and stuff like that. They show, a lot of them show amazing knowledge of anatomy, and that's way before Chinese civilization started. The reason for them knowing the anatomy was because they would catch the animals, cut them open, and eat them. So you actually have to know what you're doing really well if you're cutting an animal open. I mean, I worked as a chef, you know, so I dissected some quite a bit of animals, you know. So you actually get to know where everything is connected, where the joints are, how they work, and things like that. I'm pretty sure by the time the Chinese civilization came around, I mean, they knew very well how everything works. I mean, there's a gap in that knowledge in European history where it was any dissecting of the corpse was outlawed. But I don't think there was anything like that in Chinese history. So I'm pretty sure they knew about fascia and things like that. They probably called it something else.
I I think they do, but I don't think they necessarily, if you guys know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think they could necessarily say like, oh, this movement activates this muscle, this muscle versus this strand, etc. Like I think they understood what different components did and how the body was put together overall, but I'm not sure that the categorization is like how it is today. I think things were categorized and classified a bit differently. Like for example, if you look at the like meridian points that they use for acupuncture, I'd say that's a pretty deep understanding. It's not necessary, but it's not necessarily in terms of, as far as I understand it, uh, any one muscle, any one nerve, but it seems to be at nexus points where nerves and musculature meet, and it activates if you apply different levels of pressure at certain areas. It elicits different reactions and responses in the body. So I think it is a deep understanding, but it's not the kind of understanding where you isolate every single component and then try to put it back together. Rather, it's an understanding of how these elements move in concert here and these elements move in concert here, and somehow these are connected. I'm not certain they understood like neurons firing, for example, but
Oh,
they knew that, oh,
yeah,
if I apply
probably not.
pressure on the shoulder here, suddenly the back pain goes away, and so on and so forth. So I think they knew, I think they understood how do I say, the overlap of different bodily functions really well. I just don't think that they were taking it apart the way that I guess we do in the modern day for medical school. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. The categorization would be completely different because their understanding of the world in general, it's
Right.
a very magical driven perception.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing. Sometimes I wonder if it's not just the fact that, you know, maybe people haven't experienced what this person has experienced, and it's hard for them to follow their footsteps, but it might just be someone is explaining it in a, like you said, one type of perspective on how to explain the world, and it's being passed down to today. And today we're raised in a, you know, with more modern medical programming in the background, so to speak. So then when someone says, "Oh, start talking about Dantian," we're like, "Oh, okay, I guess." Imagine that there's that thing there.
Right.
But I guess it's not describing an organ per se, but it's describing a certain place in the body that you can utilize and learn to better utilize. So it's like it's an interesting thing. I think in the modern day we tend to separate things in neat little categories, whereas they're like, no, this is where these things all overlap here. It's a very powerful place, right? So yeah, different
I think it's
mindset.